Well, welcome back, folks. Today we're going to talk about the oil tank for the Yamaha YL1. This is the original tank that I pulled off the bike. It's in pretty good shape, actually, considering the challenge that I have with this tank is what do I do about the finish. Now, most of the parts for this unit are not available any longer from Yamaha, that being things like the cap liner, and gasket. These are the originals here, and I think I can clean those up and those will be quite serviceable. So I'm not worried about the cap. What I am concerned about, depending on how I proceed with refinishing or not, this tank, this is metal by the way, good solid steel, is the sight glass and the gasket for the outlet. None of those parts are available anymore. Now you can find them occasionally on eBay. They're real expensive. For instance, the gasket that goes underneath the sight glass, I recently saw one on eBay for around $35 US, which I thought was outrageous. This gasket here is a little more common. It goes in this fitting, underneath this fitting here, and I could probably make something that will work here. I am a little concerned about the gasket behind this sight glass, and if I was to remove this unit, and I'll come back to that in just a second. So as I think through the potential of refinishing this, I think I have really three options. One is to do nothing. That is, reinstall it. It's already been cleaned and degreased. There wasn't any oil in it when I bought it, or when I got it, I should say. So I just flushed it out really good, and there was really not much contamination in there, but there was a little sand, believe it or not. And there's a filter way down in there. I don't know if I can get you a look at that or not, but you can see right there, I think, there's a filter. So I'm not too concerned about sand having gotten into the engine, because the engine was rebuilt anyway. I would be more concerned if sand had gotten into the oil pump, because I wasn't necessarily intending to rebuild the pump unless it's leaking, which I haven't gotten to that yet. But again, one option is do nothing. If this was a simply reconditioning project, that is, replace wear items, clean it, tune it, adjust it, get it running, put it back on the road, I would put this tank back on in a heartbeat, because it's very serviceable as it sits. However, this is a frame-off restoration, and a frame-off restoration implies that everything's restored as much as possible. In terms of refinishing this tank, there's two options really. One is just spray it with a rattle can, a high-gloss black rattle can paint, which would probably work. My concern is that it's not going to be durable enough for my taste, particularly with oil. It might eventually affect the quality of the finish. The other option would be to powder coat it. Now, if I sprayed it with a rattle can, I could mask off here around the sight glass and around the outlet fitting and get away with spraying it and leave these two parts intact and in place. The only concern I have with that is I really would like to clean up and restore the sight glass. You can buy some of these parts also on eBay, the glass for instance. There are a few of them out there. Again, they're kind of expensive. I think that's some kind of a hard plastic. I would really like to take this off and clean it, and if I do so, once I open this up, I'm going to compromise very likely the gasket, and then I'm going to have to either see if I could reuse the old one or find a NOS one somewhere out on eBay or wherever. This fitting, again, I think I can come up with an alternative pretty easily. So that's the dilemma. I think what I'm going to do, and by the way, I can't leave this in place when I powder coat for obvious reasons. That's plastic and it's got some kind of a seal or gasket behind it, and so does this. And powder coat by definition uses heat and it would destroy those parts. So this has to come off if I powder coat it. So I think what I'm going to do, being anal retentive like I am going to go ahead and remove the sight glass, remove this fitting, and plan on powder coating this in a high gloss black. The risk I run is damaging the gasket or having to spend some big money to replace it with an NOS part. I think that's where I'm going to go with this. One other note I wanted to share with you. I'm very confident this is the original paint on this tank. I think you can see the run right there in the paint from the factory. It starts right here, basically goes all the way down to right there. So that shows that on these built to a price bikes back in the day, they weren't perfect by any stretch. Nonetheless, I think I'm going to go ahead and take this sight glass off, take this fitting off, see what's behind there, and then at that point I might as well go ahead and strip the paint off and powder coat it. While I was inspecting this tank, I did discover another problem with it, and that is it's got a leak right there in the seam. And I don't know, let me turn out the lights here, the bench lights. I'll see if I can demonstrate this with a flashlight. I think you can see it right there. I am covering the tank outlet so there's no light coming through that. And you can see right there, there's a leak in that seam. I don't know if it'll show this way or not. Right there. So what I'm going to do, turn on the lights here a second. What I'm going to do is strip the paint all off of this, and then I'm going to do another thorough examination with a flashlight in the dark and verify there's no other spots that are compromised, and then I'll just touch that up with either silver solder or my welder, one or the other. It looks like a wear spot. If you look at it real carefully, to me, it looks like it's almost been abraded against something. I'll have to take a look on the bike what might fit up against that. But there's no question about it. There is a leak in that seam right there. So I'll go ahead and get the paint stripped off this, get the sight glass off, get the fitting off, see where we're at. That's a 13 millimeter fitting there, so I'm just going to take a 13 millimeter wrench. I'm going to leave these clamps on here for now. Even though there's two of them, this is really the one that went at the opposite end of this hose or connected to the oil pump. I just pushed them up here together like that. Let's go ahead and see if we can't get this off. You can see the gasket right there. I'm going to leave that intact right now. I'm not really going to do anything with this, but set it aside. And now we're going to move on to seeing if we can't get this sight glass off. Pretty sure that's just threaded on. So I'll take a brass punch. Though I have a ring spanner, I'm not sure it's going to work with this. I'll check here in a second, but I might have to take a brass punch and see if I can't loosen that nut. So here's the brass punch, little lightweight hammer. I have preheated this just a little bit. You can't get crazy with the heat because that's, I think, some kind of a plastic. So let's see if I can start spinning this nut, which I think is a nut, off of here. If this doesn't work, I'll have to use plan B or move to a plan B. So I'll give this a go here. There we go. Wasn't sure there for a second I was going to be able to get it. Did bend over those fittings just a little bit, but I'm not too concerned about that. Yeah, it's threaded all right. And there's the gasket I was talking about, which actually looks to be in pretty good condition. I don't know about the sight glass, whether I can restore that or not, but the inner plate's in good shape. I probably could make something like that if I have to. We'll see. And even this is in reasonably good condition, minus the tool marks I just put on there. Okay, so I'm going to just put this back together essentially the way it was, which is like that. And I'll just run a piece of tape around this to hold this as a unit for now, and do a little more cleaning of this. And now I'm to the point where I can go ahead and strip the paint off and check to see if I've got any more leaks in any of the seams, minus that one I know that I have right there. And I'll bring you back after I've got this stripped and somewhere else in the process. There's the oil tank. I've got all the original finish media blasted off. I used glass beads for this. The area that needs to be repaired is right there. I think you just see it. I don't know if I can get a... I think if you look in there you can see the light. Now watch. See my finger? You can see where that seam has failed for some reason. It's the only bad spot I can find in the tank. It seems to be pretty solid. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to clean this area thoroughly with acetone. Generally, if you're going to use any hot process like welding or brazing or soldering, you want to avoid brake cleaner, certain brake cleaners anyway, because it can be the fumes that they give off when it's heated. If you were to clean it and then hit it with high heat right away, it gives off very dangerous fumes. And I just try to avoid that, so I'm going to use acetone and clean this area really well. I'm going to attempt to localize the heat right to that weak or failed joint right there. I'm guessing, though I don't know for sure, that this whole tank was probably brazed. So if I don't want to overheat it, because if I do so I could actually open up and create more damage by opening up the seams further. So I'm going to try to localize the heat right to that spot using, I'll show you what I've got set up here, this little simple torch outfit. This happens to be, I think, a Craftsman brand. I've had it for quite a long time, and it uses a combination of MAP gas or MAP 2 gas, MAP Pro, and oxygen to create a very hot flame. It's got a very fine tip. Let me reposition the camera here real quick. It's got a very fine tip to it, so you can get right down to a pinpoint positioning of the flame versus using a MAP torch or a propane torch, which would probably work here. Well, it would work. My concern with using those larger torches is they're just too large. The flame tip is too big, and it's a bit like using a sledgehammer to drive a finishing nail. It'll probably work, but it's really not the right tool for the job, and this will give me a much more controlled flame. So what I'm going to do is clean the tank, that spot here, really well, and then I'll get reset up and I'll bring you back and show you the brazing. I am going to braze it. This is just some standard brazing rod right here, flux covered brazing rod, and we'll see if we can't fix that little seam. Well, I have the area cleaned right here. I've got the camera positioned as best I think I can to capture this for you. See right there. I've got my little torch lit. You can see the flame right there. And my brazing rod. Now, I am not going to use flux on this. It's been cleaned really well, so I'm going to try to avoid using flux. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to localize the heat right to that joint and get it nice and hot, and try to avoid spreading the heat any further than absolutely necessary, because I don't want to create more damage or open seams by softening other braze, if in fact this has been brazed, and I'm guessing it probably has. So first thing I'm going to do is just kind of overall warm the body of the tank or the steel a little bit. You could use a heat gun for this. I don't want to overheat it because the orange jaws are plastic holding the tank, so I don't want the whole tank to get too hot. But I'm just bringing the general area up a little bit in temperature before I go ahead and start localizing the heat, as you see me starting to do right here. Remember, you always heat the item being soldered or brazed, not the filler material, in this case the brazing rod. Okay, we'll see if we can't get this to I think that's probably good enough, but we'll shut off the torch here a second. And we'll do a quick little light test. See what we got going here. And there's no light through on the inside. Took a few minutes to get that because of the mass of the tank is so big, it wants to act as a heat sink and draw the heat away. In fact, it's warm down here where my hands are, but it's not hot enough to burn me. But if I start getting closer up into here, it's hot enough to burn me. So it took a few minutes to get that heat up or temperature up where I wanted it, right at the localized spot. And I think you can see that there. I think it'll be okay. What I'll do now is let it cool, naturally cool. I'm going to plug these holes. It's a little hot. Plug this hole, and figure out how to do that. That'll be an easy hole to plug. This one will be a little tougher. Fill it with water after it's totally cooled. Make sure it doesn't leak. I'm pretty sure it's good to go. And then we'll move on with cleaning it once again. I'll put it back in the blast cabinet, blast the whole thing once again to normalize the coloring. I am not going to do a lot of cleanup of this joint. I'm going to pretty much leave it the way it is. I think it flowed out pretty good. And then we'll move on to powder coating. Well, it's been about 4 hours now since I filled the tank, the oil tank, with water. You can see there I got a plug, silicone plug in the outlet on the bottom, prevent water from escaping. It's been sitting in this position about 4 hours while I went out and did some odds and ends around the yard and other activities. Just came back to it's right after lunch now, and it's dry, so I'm confident that the brazing of that joint, you can see it right there in the middle of the shot, it's taking care of the hole or the leakage that I would have experienced if I put oil in it. And now I'm going to go ahead and bead blast the entire tank once again to prepare it for powder coat. There's the tank after the second bead blasting. Again, you can see the repair right there that I did. And there is no light coming through there now. And we tested it with water. So I'm confident that's good. I will now soak this and wash this rather in clean acetone one last time, make sure it's all degreased from my fingerprints. I did blow the inside out to make sure there was thoroughly, to make sure there was no residual media from the bead blasting or the glass media blasting. And I will rinse it out really good with clean acetone, so I think that'll be fine as well. On to the acetone. Late autumn day, looking out the west window of my shop, looking out over my main workbench where I do most of my work. If we get any wind in the next few days or so, or week, what's left of the leaves, I think will be coming down. It's a very peaceful shot. It's the middle of the day, so there's really no one around or no traffic, because everybody else is probably at work today.